and welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you like talking all things bookish with me, feel free to like and subscribe. Today I'm going to be doing the Contradictions Book Tag, and I gotta warn you, like, it's gonna get spicy, and I'm probably gonna be talking about some booktube darlings in here. Every other question on this is like, didn't like, loved, didn't like, loved. So I'm gonna be putting up those chapters. You can skip around as you like to, but like, I'm not gonna be holding back on my opinions, so sorry if I end up roasting a book that you love, but that's what we're here for, right? That's what the Contradictions Tag is all about. So with that disclaimer out of the way, I'm just gonna get into it.
Begin.
Starting right off the bat with, I like this genre, but I didn't like this book. And I've got two. I couldn't really pick. There's gonna be a lot of times on this list, I think, where there's like two books that just, ooh, I wanna talk about them both. I have so much to say. First up is Only Human. It's the last book in the Themis Files. And I love book one. It's like everything that I love about sci-fi. It's so thought-provoking and interesting. It reminds me a lot of the movie Arrival, which is just like immaculate. That's such a fantastic movie. And so this has a lot of really interesting ideas that it raises up to. We're working with like the military, we're working with linguists, and we're working with alien tech. And there's not aliens the same way that there are in Arrival, but we're kind of like dealing with the aftermath of them having been here and discovering all the stuff that they left behind. It's so interesting just thinking about, I mean, even if you're just trying to talk to somebody who's from an English-speaking country, 1,000 years from now, you know how much English has changed in just a couple hundred years. Sometimes even one decade to another. If you try to talk to your grandparents, the amount of slang that you may or may not have in your vocabulary, or even just like talking about technology, computers and stuff. Imagine explaining a computer to somebody from 100 years ago, and then trying to be able to tell somebody who speaks your language, but like so far removed from your time, being able to tell them basic ideas, but also sometimes really important ideas. How do you let somebody know, yo, this is toxic, this is nuclear, do not touch this, without being able to depend that they're going to be able to use the same language or like even symbols that you use. And then add the layer on top of that, that not only are you galaxies apart as well, you're a completely different species. Like, how do you communicate those ideas? And so I thought Sleeping Giants handled topics like that in such an interesting way. And then by the time we get to the third book, okay, so like while I was reading the second book, I was like, I love this. And I went and I bought the second book, I bought the first book, I was so excited. Halfway into the second book, I was already kind of losing it a little bit, but it was still pretty dang good. Book 3 was not. Book 3 was so far away from the original premise that, without really giving spoilers or anything, what Book 3 felt like was a snotty teenage girl just raging against her father and using giant robots to kind of hold the world hostage so she could get out her emotional battles with her daddy, and then like also having at the same time this whole bit where the author is like soapboxing to me about racism and social justice issues, and it was just like, what am I reading? This is so incredibly different from where we started. I loved the like cerebral and scientific type of dilemmas, a lot of like, you know, tough decisions and puzzles that you're trying to figure out. And then the whole other thing was just like, it was a shame. That's what it was. It was just a shame. And then the fantasy book that I complain the most about, possibly, maybe. I read it last year. It's called The Prison Healer, and I think that this was largely enjoyed by its audience. Straight up, it's YA. That's not going to be for everybody. And it is like tournaments. It's got like this big tournament trials, and I love that trope so much. And we're in this fantasy world. We've got elemental magic, super digging it. But the book is honestly like Kate and Leopold, the book. It's got, and if you haven't seen Kate and Leopold, maybe that reference won't make any sense to you, but basically the male hero is just like this lovable cinnamon roll. He can do no wrong, and I kind of felt emotionally manipulated by the author in that. Just like, he never does a single thing wrong. There's no nuance to his character. He's just like a perfect, beautiful, talented, good boy who's like humble and does things even without telling people that he's doing things for them, and just like, he does no wrong. And clearly the author had a fan favorite. And then the main character is just horrid. Aside from being beautiful and like the first woman that he's met, there's no reason for him to be attracted to her, especially when you're actually seeing like her thoughts and not just her actions. They're all bad. She is unlovable. She's not even as lovable as like a Katniss character, who is a pain to be in her teenage mind like all the time, and she makes terrible decisions if she makes any decisions at all. She has no agency. When you see the flashbacks of her, she's just kind of always doing things that seem bad, and the more you learn about her and like get to explore her character, the more I felt that it undermined any sense of like goodness that she could have had. Oh, Xena, how dare you? I'm surrounded by so many cats and they are making so much noise. But when we get to like the actual trials and things, she doesn't make a decision. The only things that she does because somebody else told her to, or they forced her hand, or she would be executed if she doesn't do it. And she doesn't make preparation. She's not clever. She's not going into it. She's just kind of like, well, I hope this works out. And then, I mean, she's the main character, so I don't think it's major spoilers to say that the second book is already out and she's still the main character in that. So like, she doesn't die. I don't think that's major spoilers to give in a series that has a singular protagonist that you read from their POV the whole time. But anyway, she doesn't make a choice. Things happen to her or for her, but she's never a character with agency. She's never making an active decision. She's just kind of like sitting in this prison, which I don't understand these prisons at all. They're basically like almost analogous to concentration camps. Like essentially the crown just locks up all of its enemies with no good reason. If you're a child who's hanging onto your parents' leg when they go to take them around like for being a rebel and go put them in jail forever with no legal recourse, the kid just goes there too. And then the kid is like the prison's property and just the same as any other prisoner, even though they were a literal child who did no wrong. They were just like with their parent at the wrong time. Yeah, I don't understand this world. I don't understand it at all. But that's where we are, and it's Kate and Leopold, and I hated every minute of it. Except, okay, like I liked the prince. I liked the bits with the prince, but also, like I mentioned, I felt emotionally manipulated because I was supposed to like the prince because he never does anything wrong. But like, other than that, every other scene is just terrible. I hate it. Throw it out. Prompt 2 is I rarely read this genre, but I loved this book. And that one I'm going to have to give to The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I couldn't say this earlier. I was trying to pronounce it right before I turned on the camera and I kept saying like Sevelin. Anyway, I really enjoyed this book. I don't really care for contemporary, especially because I feel like a lot of the time they're kind of emotional or they reflect the real world, and I'm not necessarily looking to read the real world. I mostly read for entertainment and escapism rather than just like having real life reflected back at me. And historical fiction in particular is something that I very don't like because I'm a woman and I'm Jewish and most of my friends are like queer in some way. They identify as something in the LGBTQIA type of spectrum, and the past is not a good place. Even like 10 years ago, I don't want to go back to the 2010s. That sounds terrible. Everything was worse. And so when you get back into olden times, even if it's not mentioned in the book, there's kind of just this whole historical context that's also there. Things that are happening that are probably just like a really negative political climate for a lot of different types of people and demographics. And so like, I don't want to go back in time and I don't want to kind of think about the past, because even if it's not the main point of the story, it's kind of on the periphery. Like if I want to think about the past, I'll probably just be reading a nonfiction and like being educated on an actual cool story that happened. So generally, I don't like historical fiction, but I did love The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo because Evelyn Hugo is such a boss bitch. She's like, everything that I said about the main character and the prison healer, just like walk that back, do the exact opposite. She has the most agency. She's not even like, oh, this is where I see myself in 5 years. She's like, this is where I see myself in 5 days, in 5 hours. Like, she gets it done. She has a plan and she's gonna do it. And if things go bad, you know, like she's gonna spin that. She's just gonna make it work for her. And sure, she's flawed. She's a flawed human being and she made mistakes just like everybody does. And it's so interesting to see her giving her own story and being able to talk about things that have happened, things that she's done, where she's at now. And like, so many things happen to her. I don't know, it's told so well. And I don't really cry at like books and movies and stuff, but at the end of this book, there were like little tiny tears at the sides of my eyes that I had to wipe away. If I had leaned into it, I definitely could have full on cried from it. So yeah, it's really good. It's just a good book. Prompt number 3. I love this trope, but I didn't like this book. Hi, did you want to come up? I really love dark academia, and I like following along with like the murderer's point of view. I think that that's so interesting, and I love petty. I love when people are super petty and they have all these like, they're kind of like committing crimes and just being passive aggressive. I think it's so entertaining. Stubborn, pettiness, those are things that totally get me in a character. And that's what I thought this was, because the title is For Your Own Good, and the way it's being sold is like, you know, he's kind of doing all of these little bad things in the background, but he's doing it to kind of like make people better or make the world better in a way that he imagines. And I literally forgot that that was the title and that was the premise until like a week after I finished this book, because it was not that to me. And I don't know what everybody else is reading that they liked it and they thought that it was, because like everything that he does in the book is just, it seems like he's bored. Like he's not trying to punish people, and they don't ever learn from it, and they don't change in any way. They don't know that it's even related. They just have like something happens in their life, and then all of a sudden, bad stuff. You know, like it's completely unrelated because you're just drinking coffee at school and then somebody drops dead. How would you know that it's because you had the audacity to ask this teacher if one of your students could have an extension on an extra credits assignment? Like, I would not put those two things together. And nothing he does is ever for that either. And he doesn't care about anyone other than himself. Like, he genuinely just seems like such a bored dude. Like, if you make him malicious, I could get into that. But I hated it. I hate it. It was compelling. I did keep reading. But everything doesn't make sense. And then they keep calling him, like, super smart, but then he's really just smart because the cops never figure things out, even though they're, like, trained in being able to detect things. But then everybody who's not a cop easily figures it out as soon as they start thinking about it. And I don't understand. It was a miss for me. So prompt number 4 is, I hate this trope, but I love this book. And I don't like magical realism. I want my fantasy to be fantasy. I want you to lean into it. I don't want there to be a question of like, well, I mean, you could interpret it as something fantastical happening, or you could just like interpret it as metaphor. Like, no, I want you to commit to being fantasy. I don't like contemporary. I don't like historical fiction, like I already mentioned. And so magical realism kind of feels like you want to be fantasy, but you don't have the guts to commit to it. That being said, I really enjoyed Pet. It might even make it onto my top books of the year. I thought it was fantastically done, and I choose to interpret it as being more fantasy than not, but it's still magical realism, and it's so beautiful. I already talked about it in my February wrap-up, so if you want to see more of my thoughts on it, you can go ahead and click there, but like, this book was so good, and it's magical realism, and I'm okay with that. Prompt number 5 is, I love this author, but I didn't like this book. And I know that people really like Ninth House, and that's like, a lot of people, they love this series so much. I did not like it. I loved Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. I thought they were fantastic, and she does amazing character work. But as you'll see with a trend with me, I don't like characters who lack agency. I don't like characters who aren't curious about the world around them and they just kind of let things happen to them, and they don't take part in their own story. It's just like a story that unfolds around them, because I don't want to see that. Even if the story is super interesting, I'd rather see it from another character's point of view rather than like the person stuff just happens to. And so I thought that the main character complained a lot, and like she has a lot of PTSD and trauma that's discussed in the book, and also that trauma I kind of had problems with. It felt like overkill, and it was just really trying to be like, oh look, she's so traumatized and these terrible things had happened, but also like, you're making it up. I don't know. It just felt over the top and like too much. But the way she goes about in her life and the way that she solves issues is mostly by like not solving them or using brute force when she's not really a brute force type of character. And it was really weird. I felt the setting could be so cool. And some of the chapters were actually really interesting because it's kind of like a dual POV, dual timeline type of thing. So there's definitely like potential in this world. I love the idea of secret societies and like dark ritual meetings and little hidden paths and houses and stuff that they have that they use for this sort of thing, of like dark libraries and magic. I'm on board with all of that. I think the ghosts are super neat as well. But that's not really really where the story was. I just felt like we kind of got a glimpse of that at the beginning and maybe a little bit more towards the end, but most of the middle part, we're not dealing with any of those things anymore. So yeah, I don't know what happened. I think that her character work in Six of Crows is fantastic, and I love all of the banter. And then this was just so lifeless, actually. I guess that makes sense because it's about ghosts, but like, come on. Prompt 6 is I previously disliked a book by this author, but I really liked this book. And last year I read White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson, and I hated it. It was just bad. It felt a lot like Get Out and Parasite and just all these other major franchises that are kind of doing their thing right now, and it was like a trend. And then it was just bad, and it was so boring, and the main character was awful, and she kept talking about bed bugs and how much she wanted weed, and everyone was so obsessed with marijuana in this book. Just like, calm down. And they made terrible choices. I felt like one of those people in the audience who's like yelling at the main character, "What are you doing? Why are you going to investigate that creepy noise in your house while you're on the phone?" And you hang up the phone first. Like, who does that? Did not like it. Would not recommend. But Monday's Not Coming. I read that in January, I think, and it was really good. It was kind of handling a subject that you don't see a lot, like what happens when you're friends with someone and you grow apart, you lose that friendship. What is it like to break up with a friend instead of like a romantic partner? Because we all know breakups suck, but we never really talk about friendship breakups because those happen as well. And it was just so well done. And then the thriller aspects, once they kicked in, like, dang, what? I was so into it. It was just like fascinating. I couldn't look away. And it was really, really well written the whole time. And it just like, it has a bunch of tropes that I don't like, but they were actually done well here. I don't know what it was. Hate White Smoke, love Monday's Not Coming, definitely recommend. Prompt 7 is I love this cover, but I didn't like this book. And that would definitely have to go to The Unbroken, because girl, look at her shoulders. They are gorgeous. She is ripped. She is like just totally doing the thing. You've got this great door, and I love the architecture of it and just the whole vibe of everything going on in this like picture. The artist, they deserve more money. Whatever they were paid, they should have been paid more, because this cover sells the book. The book does not sell the book. The book, I don't know if I can quite say that the book sucked, but it was definitely a letdown for me. Again, it's a main character where I didn't feel like they had that much agency, or when they did, they kept doing the same thing over and over again and not learning from it. And there's no character growth, that every single person that's around them is more interesting to follow and is telling them things that they should know. Like, I don't know why everybody around them constantly knows these things, and then they tell it to them, and then they still don't know, and then they keep making the same bad decisions. Just like everything bad that happens in this book happens because something one of the main characters did. There's no external people acting on it. It's just a bunch of dummies continuing to be dumb. And also, like, okay, so the book is fairly long. It's like 500 pages or whatever, so you have some leeway in there, but the number of times that she mentioned that she could smell somebody's bowels or that bowels were punctured, like, I get it, it's battle, lethal stuff happens, but I've never heard that in another book, and if they bring it up like once, whereas here, they brought it up every single time. That was like always the indicator that somebody is dying, that something bad has happened and you can't recover from it. It's because it's the bowels. It's always the bowels. And just like, every other author has found a way to not talk about bowels this much. Why? The last prompt is number 8, and that's I don't like this cover, but I did like this book. And Space Between Worlds, man, I love that book so much. It was probably my favorite book of last year. I feel like I need to reread it because like maybe I've just pumped it up to this like godly, unattainable status in my mind. I don't know if the book can be all that good, but I don't know, maybe if I reread it, I'll be like, yeah, no, I still agree. And I can't believe it was a debut. She does a beautiful job with the relationships, with the different themes that are here. And there's a lot of like heavy and nuanced themes, but we're looking at it from multiple angles and kind of like, you know, you'll talk about trauma and forgiveness and that sort of thing, but you'll see it reflected in multiple characters' storylines and just a slightly different facet of that subject. So it's being kind of more fully explored, and I don't know, she just did such a fantastic job. But I hate that cover. One, it does that Hollywood thing of like blue and orange. Like, girl, it does not pop the way you think that it pops. I don't like it. Stop. 2, it's got that like really bright strip down the middle that's just, it's a lot, and it takes away focus from the interesting parts of the like work. I think that the art in general is very good, and it's very good as like a storyboard or a jumping off point, and like getting people to understand what this book is about, because you've got the two women wearing clearly very different types of clothing, and they're from very different worlds. You can see that with like the parallels and the contradictions and all of that. And you've got like kind of the slummy type of city over here, and then you got like the bright shining city on the other side that's like super futuristic and technological. That's all great. I don't think that aesthetically as a piece it works. It doesn't call out to me on the shelf. If anything, this is one of those books where I just always will only show the spine, because I love this book, but man, it deserved better. It needs a spicy cover update. So those are all of the questions in the contradictions tag. I guess I can tag some people. If you want to do this tag, please go ahead and let me know. Tell me then you've put it up so I can go and watch yours as well. And I will say that I would love to see Charlotte take this on, and I will see you in the next one.
Oh, hi.